Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. Great to have you back. I hope you and yours are well. And another exciting week. As weeks go, there's always something to talk about and we've got plenty. Let's get the gang in right away, starting with our favourite lawyer up there in Clackmannan, our Eva.
Hi
Eva.
How are
How are
you?
Beat you to it. I'm good, you?
I'm great. I'm just back from a brilliant afternoon in Edinburgh with the Women Won't Wish gang. More of that later, but it's set me up for a weekend of protest and demonstration, political agitation.
Get that claymore out the thatch. It's time to go to war. And over there in Edinburgh, in Old Ricky, our weatherman, it's Lloyd Quinnan.
Afternoon, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How about you, my friend?
Oh, very well, very well.
Excellent. And over there in North Dakota, Phil Coatbridge Cavalier himself.
All right, troops. All is well. Aye, it's still a wee bit cold here, but it's been a fabulous winter, relatively speaking. In fact, they're thinking about coming out with a new strategy of stop recycling and make the weather warmer. What could possibly go wrong? I might just buy any of it myself. Who knows?
I would love it. And now, our weekly now, we have a mystery guest. And our mystery guest this week is no stranger to us or to you. They're wonderful, from the city of discovery. It's our Denise. Denise Finlay, welcome back. How are you, my friend?
Hi. Yeah, very good. I've just been to the same demo as Eva to keep men out of women's jails, which you would think would be obvious, but sadly in Scotland it's not. So good, energised, happy.
I think if I ever go to jail in Scotland, I'll be trying to get into one of them.
Of course you would. Any man.
It's because I'm scared to get into the other ones. But anyway, let's get started. Been a bit of a week. Now, the big thing of the week is the SNP had a broadcast this week, Eva. Now, Scottish National Party, its main aims is independence. Well, it used to be. They never mentioned it once in a broadcast. Were you shocked?
No.
Next question.
They're doing it deliberately, aren't they? There was quite a good analysis somebody did the other day. It might have been Wings Over Scotland, actually, whereby they looked at the major speeches that Humza's made in the last wee while and looked at the vocabulary and the words that seemed to be repeated over and over again. And it was about how the SNP was acting on the priorities of the people of Scotland. And none of those were independence. Independence just isn't right there at all. It was education, it was the NHS, it was roads, the A9, it was everything except independence. And it just made me wonder, what is it that Humza thinks he was elected to do? Because he ran on a ticket for independence, so did all his colleagues in Holyrood, so did all his pals down in Westminster. So if they were elected to do that, why have they forgotten about it? Could it be because he doesn't have a route map to independence? Could it be because he knows perfectly well that the Scotland United strategy was the best and only way to attain independence in the foreseeable future? Is it because he just doesn't understand how the electoral system works and that he could collapse Holyrood and have a de facto referendum later this year? So the fact that the independence word wasn't mentioned, not a surprise. Unfortunately, I think they've lost their raison d'etre, lost their mojo, and it's going to be up to other people in other parties and people of no parties, probably, from what we're hearing, to take up the cudgels and keep up the good fight, because the party elected so to do seems to have lost it altogether.
Absolutely. He said the Scottish people's priorities, Lloyd. Now, last week and every other week, we talk about every opinion poll for the last 12 months has said that Scotland's priority is independence. Between 52 and 56% we've had. But he's not mentioned that priority. Why?
It's absolutely bizarre. It's a strange political strategy running up to a general election when you already have a gap between how the people are identifying they will vote for the SNP in the mid-30s, but support for independence is in the mid-50s. How can you possibly not mention independence unless you've effectively abandoned that 15 to 18% of people who support your core purpose, but you've decided that they're not important? So there's that. Then there's the issue of whether or not independence is actually in the lexicon of the current leadership of the SNP, because I've seen no end of leaflets being put out by Westminster candidates, none of which mention independence. But it's a very, very strange strategy. But by the same token, I think maybe if they think that if they stop mentioning it, then everybody else will forget it. After 80, nearly 90 years of the existence of the Scottish National Party, the one thing everybody in Scotland knows is that the Scottish National Party stands for independence. But the Scottish National Party is trying slowly but surely to convince people that they're not actually the party of independence, they're the party of the people's priorities.
Does the SNP stand for Scottish National Priorities, Phil?
Yeah, it would seem it stands for the Scottish National Party leadership priorities. Independence, nothing less, was the core mantra, as we keep saying, as we know, as we understand it, as most people who are actually even not paying attention, which is probably the only reason that the SNP support remains as high as it currently does, because those folk are too busy getting on with their lives, and quite right too. You know, they don't have the opportunity to look into policy and dig deep and spend time researching as some of us do. But that independence, nothing less, is gone. And we need to spread the word here. As if we need any more evidence that this SNP has turned away from independence and, like the infamous Iron Lady, appears not to be for turning back towards independence. And that's a very appropriate analogy, because they're fighting a losing battle here. They are on an ever-reducing budget and they're incompetent. They cannot achieve what Alex Salmond's SNP achieved, which was to show that we can govern ourselves competently. We know what's best for the people of Scotland. We react to what is best for the people of Scotland, and we understand what unifies us. Independence, nothing less. And that's where we can bring in the full gambit, the full range of political opinions, parties, and objectives that are the people of Scotland. And push us behind one unifying mantra, which is independence, nothing less. Well, Nicola Humza et al. Have definitely blown that achievement, that significant and great achievement that we together achieved, out of the water with our crass idiocy, sheepishness, and kowtowing to the UK establishment. So sadly, the SNP leadership are taking us down a dead end, and they need to be cut off. Let's leave them wandering down that dead end and bring the rest of the SNP people back online and back into a Scotland United, or a unifying principle or core mantra that remains independence, nothing less.
Absolutely. Denise, one of the worst campaigns in all the years I was in the party was in 2017, where word came out from on high, which was, don't mention the I word. And what actually happened was that over 500,000 of the independence votes stayed at home. And we've already touched on this 15 to 18% who are in favour of independence, but not the SNP. Is this, deviating away from independence going to cost the SNP seats, do you think, at this upcoming general election?
It is kind of strange that they're doing this, and I think more than costing them seats, it's costing them activists and enthusiasm of grassroots, because parties have a North Star, and the SNP's is independence, and it unifies, and it's a direction. That's the direction we're going in, and that brings everybody together. But if they lose their North Star, and we have to say that the SNP they've lost their direction, they've lost their North Star. If they lose their North Star, then the activists at any level within the SNP, from even people maybe in quite senior positions down to the grassroots activists, they get disillusioned, they get angry, and then they get the awkward squad. They start causing trouble, because it's like, why aren't we talking about independence all the time? And then these activists get shoved out, they get bullied out. Now, the careerists in the party, they're perfectly fine because they're happy to say and do anything. They're in the party for a career. So they rise because they're willing to say men can be women, and they're willing to say that Anne McLaughlin is a better Justice Secretary than Joanna Cherry. So they rise. And that's why we've ended up with a party of incompetence. People that are popular, people that are competent, people that are driven by the principle and the goal of independence are seen as difficult, not playing along. So they're marginalized, and you get the kind of people we have today supposedly leading the independence movement. And you can look at a party in 2026, they will have been in power in Scotland for almost 20 years. Now, you can argue that a nationalist party that's been in power for almost 20 years and has not achieved independence for their country is not a nationalist party. And I don't think the SNP are anymore. They're trying to find their places, making devolution work. And we heard it in 2015 when Tommy Shepherd said he would be they'd gone down there to be good parliamentarians. And we've heard it from Kirsty Bachmann. So when people tell you what they are, believe them, and you're better doing it the first time.
Yeah, it's quite because the Labour Party are doing their best to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, Eva. Now, I don't believe for a minute, I think it will be like 2017, where, and I've said this before, where the independence vote will stay at home. They're wooing the Tory vote. But today, I mean, among all the other things that they've done, we do have a small video on the director of Labour's Together, his name is, I've forgotten his name now. Could you stick it up there, Kecky, the video?
Why don't you send the smuggler gangs and put them on the barge that, has been set aside for the asylum seekers to, and then, ship the barge up to the north of Scotland for all who cares?
Who cares? It's the Scots.
Absolutely. You're the guy a medal. That's just increased the vote for independence by another couple of percent. That's Josh Simons. He's the director of Labour Together.
Yeah.
Labour Together exists to explore, wait for it, how to win and govern in the age of insecurity. Josh's job is to develop bold ideas to make Britain stronger and more secure and give Britons back hope and confidence in their future. I think he's lost his mojo. What he says, though, is he was previously a research fellow at Harvard, a visiting research scientist at Facebook, a technology policy fellow at New America. He worked for the Labour Party as a policy advisor. He's the founder and a trustee of the Civic Power Fund and a trustee of Engage Britain. But the boy is devoid of common sense and clearly has absolutely no concern either for refugees or people who've been trafficked, let alone for the people of Scotland. I would imagine he's one of these folk that comes up here for a wee trip a couple of times a year to have a wee drambuie, maybe wear a kilt, go shooting, do a wee bit of fishing or something like that. One of these folk that think it's okay to store Trident on the Clyde because it's much safer than it would be down in the Thames or in Devonport or something like that. And he's managed single-handedly to ruin the Labour campaign in Scotland because that video is going to be played over and over and over again. And it's also a lesson for the SNP because they've been cozying up to Labour. Remember, just a few weeks ago, Humza Yousaf wrote to Keir Starmer seeking to cooperate and collaborate with him. That's the kind of people that the SNP are trying to soak into. What a disgrace and a lesson for everybody. Labour are not to be trusted. The Scots binned them. They kicked them out, more or less, by a couple of worthies several years ago, and that's where they deserve to stay. What they do not deserve to do is to be in the ascendancy in Scotland, because that attitude from that fellow, who's obviously in a strong position, is not an isolated one within the Labour Party of Great Britain, which is a unionist party, there to serve the union, not to serve the people of this country.
Correct. Remember that, folks. There's no Scottish Labour Party. No such party exists. They're an English nationalist party. And it's true fashion. The next day, when he got pulled up, Lloyd. He gave it on. Oh, I think it was it was either he was granny was Scottish or he was half Scottish and he loved Scotland, and it was banter. Don't you love the banter? Complete and absolute clot. You're on mute. What do you think your name is, Yvonne?
Right, I owe you a pound. What it exemplifies is, you know, what you find in the English political class is their colonial mindset. And it slips out at moments like that when they're on question time or being interviewed by people who went to the same kind of schools and universities as them. They assume they have the same values, so they trot out statements like, "Oh yeah, just shove it up north beside the Scots." And it's a product of a colonial mindset. They do not see us as equals in any way whatsoever. They don't see the people of this country, the whole political class in England, the Westminster system in all its forms, believes that we are second-class citizens and treats us as such. And all he was doing was just letting it slip. And it's only when they get caught, they come out with these pretend excuses like, "Oh, I love Scotland. I've got a Scottish granny. You know, I once had haggis." And they don't understand that, in actual fact, that kind of response reconfirms their colonial attitude towards us, because they think they can buy us off with baubles, bangles, and beads, frankly, and that's the attitude. Terrible.
When you get them coming up, and I was surprised last time Starmer was up, Phil. They usually give them a can of Iron Brew for that photo shoot. You know, I'm one of you guys. Look, I drink Iron Brew too. It's quite. I mean, it just as Lloyd says, it just they view us as a colony. Just they can do and say anything they like.
Yes, it's sadly true. It's as yes, Josh Simons as Eva described. He is exactly as Eva described, and he will use analysis by organisations like Cambridge Analytica to manipulate the message that will win. And they will be guided by, well, it's a numbers game. That's what modern, especially since the social media age has arrived, that's what the analysis and analytical people do. They figure out what the headlines, the same as newspaper headlines. People say they don't listen to the newspapers, they don't listen to the news, we don't believe the BBC, and yet when you go into a conversation, they haven't done their homework and they quote headlines at you. That's how this continues to work. And this kind of talk, this harks back to the Dunkirk days, you know, that great achievement and indomitable British spirit, which is desperate, but as Lloyd states, it's a product of the colonial mindset. And I hope this guy and others continue with his garbage, but we need it to be seen and understood by the people of Scotland for what it is. Exactly that, a colonial mindset, a superior approach, a taking us for granted. And quite frankly, who wouldn't? I mean, we had our chance, we said no. They threw the kitchen sink at us at the end because they feared that actually we might just win, and we very nearly did. But I like there's a really good article by Wings. I know Wings have put some really good stuff out over the years and some really good stuff recently, but there's one called Guided by Voices, and it's about Labour. You talked about Starmer earlier and the policy U-turns in Sarwar and Humza, and there's a brilliant line in it. He says, honestly, you know, because he's talking about the Labour's recent policy U-turn as being political bravery, Sarwar's saying, and the Scottish leader said it's crucial for leaders not to make promises they can't keep. Oh, really? SNP been guilty of that, and that was the only way to rebuild trust in politics. Garbage. But the line that got me was it was a visiting article that was published by Wings by Conor Matchett, and he said, honestly, this stuff is comically gold, but in a winner takes all dumb off with Humza Yusuf's SNP, it's way too close to call. Because as we noted yesterday, the SNP seems determined to go into this year's general election riding the horse of making Scotland's voice heard at Westminster. That's why there's no mention whatsoever of independence, and that is why the current SNP is a busted flush. And we have seen it coming for a very long time. More and more people are catching on to that idea, but we need to get that in headlines, and since we don't control the headlines, how do we get that message over to more and more people to punish those who have turned their backs on the what's best for the Scottish people and what's right for our country and everyone who lives in it. Well, almost everyone, except those who practice usury, and you lot can all jog on, in my opinion.
Yeah, and there's also the plantation as well. Denise, do you not find it tiresome when this? I remember there was not so long ago, there was a Tory woman who was talking about Cromwell and enslaving Scots, and they were all guffawing and laughing. And it is quite tiresome the way they behave.
Well, yeah, it is that sense of a superiority. Although I have to say the whole smuggler thing is not a terribly bad idea, because I reckon there's probably be a shortage of smugglers soon in Scotland. There's minimum alcohol pricing going up, and also there's the fresh veg from the EU. So maybe we could do with the smugglers. So it's not a terrible bad idea. But what I think is really sad and awful and really a failure of the SNP government is that people are considering going back to Labour. This is the Labour Party that presided over Scotland's wealth being just funneled south. The oil wealth built the city of London, or they built London, physically built London, and the Scots just saw poverty and unemployment and deindustrialisation, and the Labour Party were happy to let that happen, and they sat there and they let it happen. And the fact that Scots, maybe if the polls are correct, are thinking of going back to Labour in this next election just shows what an abject failure this SNP government has been. And that, to me, is a sad thing. Though, smugglers, not terribly against them, to be honest.
Yeah, we could do with some inward immigration. The population's getting older. Yeah. We need some people up. But, this wasn't the only nice fox's paw by a Labour member. Techie, can you stick up Mr. Paul Sweeney, was an MP, now an MSP, a list MSP. He came out with a belter, Eva, an absolute belter. Considering all that's going on in Gaza, he was upset. Damn, he sold his BAE Systems shares 2 months ago. But he's still got a nice return on his investment, though. But, he could have made more. With every Palestinian child killed, with every Palestinian mother killed, with every Palestinian innocent civilian killed, our Paul Sweeney here could have made more money. Isn't that a shame that the poor guy's not making more money?
You need to really reduce this to the most basic of principles. He represents the Labour Party. He represented them in Westminster. He represents them in Holyrood now. The Labour Party was supposed to be the party of peace, the party that supported CND, the party that was founded following, wars, deprivation, hunger, want, you name it. Each of us here, we've said this before, had grandparents who fought in wars and who subsequently voted Labour because they believed that Labour were the party of A, the working class, and B, peace. So to think that somebody like Paul Sweeney actually had shares in BAE, a defence arms company, and to think that he can joke about it, that his Labour forefathers would be burling in the graves that they're not buried in, because as some Chris McElhenney always talks about, Keir Hardie doesn't have a grave, but as what folks say, Keir Hardie would be burling. It is appalling to think that he would make a joke out of that, let alone have the shares in the first place, given that there was a demo earlier this week outside BAE Systems in Glasgow because people are concerned that they're exporting parts for arms that had been used by the Israelis against the Palestinians. So it ill behoves a member of the Scottish Parliament to conduct himself in that fashion, and he should apologise immediately. And then that would take us on to debating why it is that the Scottish Parliament has not yet called for a ceasefire.
And that's the point. Why have they not called for a ceasefire, Lloyd?
It's beyond my understanding. I know that Palestinian activists, not Scottish Palestinian activist supporters, but Palestinians in Scotland, approached the Scottish National Party in Holyrood to get them to put down a motion, and no one was prepared to do it. But now the Scottish National Party is going to put a motion down at Westminster calling for an immediate ceasefire next week. Now, for me, that is, as my granny would say, backside foremost. If we believe in our Parliament and we believe in our democracy, then the Scottish National Party should have brought that motion to the Scottish Parliament, have it passed by the Parliament, and then present the motion at Westminster on behalf of the Scottish Parliament. That's the way it should have been done. This is playing British politics. There's another element to this. I'm aware that there was a discussion within the Alapa Party about a motion not too dissimilar to this one. And it was decided that now was not the time and that they would put a decision on this off till their conference. Now, I fail utterly to understand the wisdom of that. In fact, the only way I could describe it is it's Norman wisdom.
Yeah, there's hundreds dying every day and our politicians are playing at politics, Phil. Now, you're an ex-Westminster MP. Do you think it should have gone to Westminster, or do you agree with Lloyd that they should have taken it to Holyrood and then also taken it down to Westminster? It's another quid coming.
Yeah, I'll go with Lloyd on that one. And I just, you know, there's something else that irks, and there has to be some consideration of the big picture here. It's very easy to bemoan something like this, and it's the fact that he pretends to be one thing while practicing another. You know, the whole disingenuous nature of this guy, and his foolishness. He's gloating and joking about something that's very, very serious, and people are dying in great numbers in an absolute appalling situation that he's contributing to. Now, while there's nothing wrong with the principles of capitalism, right? The basic ones. If you read the original literature on this, you will understand that it is not incompatible with socialism. The whole issue is to make it cheap for people to live, inexpensive for governments should make it inexpensive for people to live. Companies can hire people inexpensively and be competitive. That's really, in a nutshell, how it originally started. It's all about definitions, and it's all changing. And notice I say socialism, not communism, I hasten to add. But it comes down to what exactly do you mean by capitalism and socialism, and we need to be very careful about the definitions. What we should also understand is that most of the problems, come from the extremes of the left and the right. That's where it's really dangerous. And Paul Sweeney here is gloating and joking over his loss of profit, which in principle isn't a bad thing, as a Labour-elected MSP, which purports to represent the people, when currently the military-industrial complex continues to wreak havoc across the globe. And his money he's making, he could have made more if he'd held on to these shares and backing something that has gone out of hand. It's went too far to the right. And I say this as a capitalist, profit is not a dirty word, but what Paul has done, pretending to be one thing of the left while practicing gloating over the disgraceful situation that we face now, where profit is put way before people, and the murder of people, and the destruction and annihilation and the ethnic cleansing of people. That's quite another thing. And that's what really sticks in the craw with most folk. So, no, Paul, very, very poor taste, ill-judged, and it just shows you he's another freeloader, another guy who's really not worthy of being an elected member for the people of Scotland, who do not support his outlook on this situation.
No, they don't. I mean, you're an ex-Labour member, Denise. Would you must find that a Labour Party member complaining about not making enough profits out his war bonds, his war shares, while something that's going on in Gaza. It's really quite incredible.
And Ukraine.
Well, yeah. Well, I would say Labour lost their North Star as well, and I think since they lost socialism, they've been flailing around, and now again they're a party of careerists. You just have to look at the guy that leads them, Sir Keir Starmer. There's nothing even remotely socialist about that guy. He's basically a Tory. I mean, he is a Tory. He's indistinguishable. And Labour have dropped every principle. They even they're even keeping the House of Lords, and they had that in their original manifesto. So you get a guy like Paul Sweeney, who's clearly not, he's just a careerist, gloating, and he's not dissimilar to the other Labour guy that was talking about shipping the smugglers up. The same type, you know, like comfy, middle class, gloating about his shares. You know, that's not kind of, it's worse than champagne socialism. Also, it's about the money, you know, war makes money. The misery that we're seeing, making money for people, is wrong. The shares should go down, not up, when there's wars. And I think I would like to see something, you know, when Scotland becomes independent, about us not creating arms and not selling arms to anybody at all.
I
Because
agree.
it's obscene that though that killing we see is making profit for anyone at all. In fact, we should take the profits away from the arms companies if they make it out of war. It's just completely wrong, immoral, disgusting.
I did note, though, I hate to pull up a guest, but you used the word labour and principle in the one sentence, which, you know, as they don't have any, it just doesn't, no, not right. But, you know, the SNP are also, on the question of the war era, have been naughty, in my opinion, this week. Brendan O'Hara, I always thought was a good guy, has been whining and dining with Israeli weapons manufacturer down there. And if he does he not even realise the optics of that? Well, there's a genocide going on. He's sitting supping ale and drinking champagne with Israeli warmongers.
It's like a scene out of Animal Farm, isn't it? It really is. You know, as we've said so many times before, they've forgotten their raison d'etre, as Denise has so eloquently said. They've lost their North Star. This is absolutely appalling, and in my view, it's basically unforgivable. This man is elected to attain independence for Scotland. He is, and would describe himself as, an anti-nuclear campaigner. I think he would likely describe himself also as being peace-loving and peaceable. Why the hell he wants to attend a drinks reception with arms manufacturers absolutely beats me, because there cannot possibly be anything positive in that for the Scottish independence movement. If there is something of benefit in there, it is not a benefit for his country. So it's either a benefit for his party's position or it's benefiting him personally. And I think that it really does. Decency and accountability both require Brendan O'Hara to give a public explanation of why he was at that event, because he ought to be doing far better by his country and by his peace-loving principles.
Isn't it kind of indicative, Lloyd, of the fact that our MPs down there have settled down and they're into the groove of the receptions with the arms manufacturers, with the lobbyists, all that stuff, you know, wine with every meal at home, wine at the table in the subsidised restaurants. They've settled down. He didn't think about it for a minute, it would seem, about the optics, did he?
No, and the saddest thing for me about this is I've known Brendan for a very long time, both as a political activist and as a colleague working in television. Brendan's not a stupid guy, but he makes himself look stupid by claiming to be anti-nuclear, claiming to be a peacenik, and then attending these affairs. But I think what it does ultimately is it exemplifies the way that people are not necessarily ground down, but how they are drawn in by the spider's web that is Westminster and all its flummeries. And I find it frankly tragic that Brendan now would appear to be very firmly on the devolutionist wing of the party. To cozy up to the Israelis, knowing his background and his family's understanding of occupation and colonization, I find it quite extraordinary that he would even be in the same room as those who represent Elbit or the Israeli military-industrial complex. And frankly, I'm deeply personally saddened by it.
Yeah, you also, Phil, you know Brendan as well. You think highly of him, I believe.
Yes, yes, I do. I mean, I do like. I can't condone what he's just done, of course. Um, Again, like Lloyd, he's a man I know and worked with and like. I mean, he's a good principled man, or he was. But it's going back to this troughing and not standing up for your principles. And what we get here, it's instead of turning as one, as an organization, when you have a leadership that have taken you off program, we all have different moments at which the penny dropped and we decided the SNP have lost their way. Now, as each of us recognise that, it's not, if 70% of us recognised that on the same day and did something about it, then we could change the direction of the SNP. The problem is that gradually they cut and get out and get rid of those who stand up. And those who stand up and are naysayers or say, well, wait a minute, what about our raison d'etre? What about the fact that we're supposed to be about independence, nothing else? Why aren't we mentioning it? Gone. You're sidelined, you're marginalised, and you're removed. And when your employment and wealth, and let's face it, it comes back to feeding the id and people know what side their bread's buttered on, depends on you retaining your job, then you follow on. And you justify it by saying things like, well, I've got to compromise. I can't give it my whole way. Maybe there's something better or wiser behind it. I think Brendan's certainly one of those I would count as smart enough to have figured out that we are being turned over. We are being betrayed by this leadership of the SNP, and they no longer stand up for what is right and what is best for Scotland. But why do this then, Brendan? One is, I agree with Lloyd, he's a smart guy, knows what he's doing. And given his background and knowledge, why do this? Well, self-interest. It comes down to simple. It's as simple as that. And it's another big black mark against Brendan, which is a shame because he certainly has and had the potential to be one of the better ones. And he was one of the better ones. I remember very early when we went down in 2015, he was put on because obviously his constituency in Argyll and Bute, Inverclyde, sorry, but round about that area, he's got, yeah, he's got Faslaying, and that's why he was put front and centre when the first issues kicked off, and he coped very, very well. He did very well and gained the admiration of all of us around him to step up to the plate, not being. I mean, he was of SNP like most of us were, but not in the favoured cabal. Although at that time we hadn't really seen that cabal to its full effect, and we still had the full fox hunting game. We all had a voice, and we thought we had a voice, and we thought we were all in it together, and we went down together, and really impressed because we stood together like Sinn Féin are right now, but we've sadly lost our way, and so. Again, since Nicola came in, the SNP party line here, which is a unionist compliant line, we also see this across the globe with the neoconservative establishment. Instead of standing up for Scotland, Brendan, and what our values are and what your values and you were, he's now kowtowing to the UK government policy line, which is not in line with what's best for the Scottish people or the majority of his constituents. The majority of Scotland want independence, as polls have consistently shown for some time now. And to add to that, I would argue that it's not best for Scotland to enter into NATO or the EU as it currently stands, even if we were able to, but that's another story.
Yeah, well, we're coming on to that now, because another one, Alan Smith, who I remember not so right as soon as the Ukraine war, he and Stuart MacDonald toddled off to Kiev, sat behind a Union flag and started spewing British foreign policy. He's now, while the Scottish people are struggling to put food on the table, to keep the lights on, to keep their job, to keep their head above water, his big statement of the week was, we have to make sure when Scotland becomes independent, we join NATO. NATO, who's now, I mean, will be too strategic to go dark, which we must remain resolutely committed towards in independent Scotland becoming a member of NATO. I will fight that with every ounce of my life. It's the worst thing. They're now discredited after Ukraine. What is it with these SNP MPs, Denise?
Okay, so it's because they go to Westminster. That's the problem. Then the British establishment have them in their lair. And everyone's got weaknesses. It's like, have you ever seen The Devil's Advocate with, the guy resists and then they just go for the other weakness. So everybody's got weaknesses. And so they can be persuaded. So, and also people, especially male politicians and female politicians as well, I'm sure, have quite big egos. Very big egos. So they get their egos stroked and they're made to feel important. And then they are taken to Ukraine and made to feel important and stuck behind a Union Jack. So there you have your nationalist politicians sitting at a table behind a Union Jack. Why on earth? Because they've been, what would you call it? They've been
brainwashed.
Assimilated, I think. They've been assimilated into the British system. And now they're Brits. They're actually Brits. And so probably sending all these people to Westminster wasn't the smartest idea when a country wants independence. So I'm not saying I'm in favour of abstentionism completely, but something has to be done to prevent the Brits assimilating the people that go down from Scotland. Now, we could have better people go down, people that are not going to get, bribed and cajoled and flattered. Flattery is probably what they employ a lot of, into doing, the Brits' bidding. But I think that that's what we have to think about, and we have to think seriously about the type of person that we send down there, because unfortunately, they seem to go to the bad.
Yeah. Well, I am in favour of abstentionism, as everyone knows. I wouldn't send anyone down there. But that's another story for another day. Alan Smith's in your neck of the wood, Eva. When you hear him talking about that, it must bite with you.
It's such a disappointment, because I think that we've all had our own political heroes, and I wouldn't say that Alan Smith was a particular hero of mine at any time, but I did admire a few speeches that he made while we were still in Europe pre-Brexit, and I did quite like the bit of showmanship from him in the speech, cher collègue in the European Parliament, leave a light on for Scotland, we'll be back. So that was memorable, but unfortunately, since he's been here as an elected politician and the member for Stirling, his performances do not tend to have been memorable for the right reasons. And I think that that's probably painfully obvious to him when he has a wee look at the comments on his Twitter feed in response to his NATO article, because in the main, they are not supportive. Some folk are saying decisions like this will be made by the people of Scotland once we're independent. Others are saying, like we've said here before, can't put the cart before the horse. Let us see the route map to independence. Get independence first, then talk about the other stuff, whether it's NATO or the EU or whatever. The monarchy, for example. But other people have not been quite so polite. A good friend of Prism, Annie Glenn, says, stick NATO and that other warmongering entity, the EU, where the sun don't shine. And that actually is a pretty common thread running through the remarks. It is not a good thing at the moment in Scotland to favour membership of NATO, but this is the softening up. This is the SNP remaining furrowed to the British establishment, taken under the wing, made to feel important, when really what they should be doing is developing the spines that they're all supposed to have, enabling them to learn how to negotiate firmly and strongly with the Westminster establishment and get us the hell out of there. If the SNP don't achieve it, which clearly they don't seem intent on doing, then I'm with Denise all the way. Let's elect people who cannot be bought and sold. People whose souls and whose principles are not for sale. Maybe the people that we want to elect are those who don't want to be politicians, but want to stand up as ordinary citizens, maybe independentistas for independence, something like that. and
Absolutely.
elect a majority of ordinary common people of Scotland, maybe like the small folk that won at Bannockburn, and get them to negotiate the independence settlement, because I have a funny feeling that these are the kind of people that are more likely to get the job done double quick and to get a deal that Scotland can take and run with and turn this into the country it's meant to be, and get the hell out of the English or British influence and the NATOs and the EUs of this world and go and get stuffed.
I'm with Annie Glenn. Well said, Annie, by the way, as well. And well said, Eva. I think, Lloyd, it was that great philosopher, Scottish philosopher, William Connolly, who said, anyone that wants to be a politician should immediately be debarred. As Eva's alluded to, it's not a bad idea, because people like Alan Smith, and it's not the first, we do this every week, they're not reading the room. They're so wrapped up in that bubble, they're not actually reading what the people of Scotland are feeling.
Yeah, I mean, Alan Smith particularly has been in his own little movie since he stopped being a lawyer and went to be Richard Lochhead's researcher in 2001. I know Alan, and I know of him for a very long time. Between Alan Smith and Stuart MacDonald, you've got the Sootian sweep of Scottish politics. The question is, who is the Mr. Corbett with their hand up their back? That's the real question. Smith has got nothing to say that's of any importance to the ordinary people of this country. And it is, even we fall into it. Yes, he made some nice quips. He made some nice remarks. That wonderful line about leave a light on for us. It's all theatre. It's theatre. It's the movie that Alan is in. And far too many politicians of all parties in Scotland, but primarily the Scottish National Party, are in their own little movie. And unfortunately, the extras in their movie are the poor of this country and the people who cannot afford to put food on the table, switch the heating on, or indeed those that are sleeping on the streets. These people are not fit for office.
No, they're not. I like to call them he of the broken eyebrow. Phil, I know you and I were on opposite sides back in the day of the NATO. We've mentioned it of the NATO debate, and I know you've now come over to my side of the argument. But as I said to Lloyd, there is no way that Alan Smith has read the room. In Scotland, that is. Down in England, they might be all for it, gung-ho. But the Scottish people are not up for this.
Yeah, the Scottish people in Scotland is not up for this. Alan has read the room that he cares most about, which is the small cabal of leadership within the current SNP and the retaining of his job and ticking boxes so he continues to get pats in the back and does what Tommy said right at the start, which kind of, I was sat there listening to Tommy saying, we're going to behave, I'm thinking, what happened to Parnell? We were talking about Parnell. We were talking about, and I'm another one. I felt very quickly, I figured out that one, you're on your own here. I'm on my own, and I've put my faith in people that maybe I shouldn't have put my faith in, because I've managed big projects and contracts and big teams, and I walked into a small group of people. I think there was 6 of them or something before us, or 8, and they just no idea what to do with 56 of us. They just had none of them had the experience of managing people on that level. At those figures and that numbers. No, on NATO, as you've articulated, and as I've stated before, I went as a delegate to NATO headquarters as a guest of the US mission, as part of a team including Brendan O'Hara and Chapman, Mr. Chapman, another good gentleman, because that was both Rosyth, where I used to work, because I've got quite a wee bit of military background experience, not in the military, but working with them. Anyway, I went down there to meet the US mission, primarily. Then I went on to meet the German general in charge of SHAPE, Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, along with this team, and spoke directly, because I was the financial side of it, about funding in NATO with Trump looming. Because at that time, as I've said before, just in a nutshell, if Trump was coming in, America pays 70% of NATO's funding. If these talks, as he was going to do, and we anticipated he was going to win, he was going to drop to 50%. By my calculations, even if everybody committed their GDP 2% of the GDP, they were still going to be about 20 billion short. What are you going to do about it? And their question really was, will Scotland as an independent nation join NATO, and will you pay 2% of your GDP? That's really what I fished out of that meeting, and I answered it straight. Well, we can't say that, but we believe we probably will, because we've bought into it and we, as you well know, have agreed to join NATO. Now, as initial supporter during that famous debate, and I believe there was good reasons for that then, but now especially what we as Scotland and Britain in NATO have done to Ukraine, and the unnecessary slaughter of around 650,000 Ukrainians, mostly men, because that's war, I would not rejoin NATO in its current form, nor indeed the EU, as Eve had pointed out, but rather I would support a European army aligned with European peacekeeping values, not the neocons that currently run Europe. And certainly what makes us tick, it's not war making. And I would also switch to, I would support EFTA until such times as NATO and the EU reflect the values and principles that the Scots and other like-minded Europeans, which are the majority, hold dear.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the latest from Trump, if he gets re-elected, and it looks like he will be re-elected unless he goes to prison. He made a comment this week about anyone that's not paying their 2%, if the Russians want to march in, he won't lift a finger to help them. Good old Donald, he's not daft. So anyway, moving on, because time is beating us here, Denise. So if you want to comment on that one, great. But what has happened this week? Now, my question is that officially the UK is in recession. Now, back in 2014, we were told it was better together, and the strong, broad shoulders of the United Kingdom, and how great it was, and how we couldn't survive. Can you ever? I'm struggling. I'm 70 odd years of age now. I can't remember when there wasn't a financial crisis and we were in recession. This union doesn't work. Basically, it doesn't, because we keep getting skint. That's a pound you owe me, Denise. I've made a fortune. Mate.
So I think it's worse than that, because we've done something of our own making that's we're paying for, and it's a terrible price. So after the referendum, the Smith Commission, they decided that Scotland would have tax raising powers, and that meant all the things about the Barnett formula no longer existed. So John Swinney, he signed up to this, and what it basically means is Scotland, they said they would have a no detriment clause, but they don't. So what it means is Scotland pays for UK mistakes. If we don't grow faster, if we don't go fast enough, faster than London, we're penalised. But nobody grows faster than London. So we've signed up to this ridiculous fiscal framework that costs us billions, has cost us billions, and continues to cost us billions. But no, we didn't just sign up to this once, we signed up to it twice, because Kate Forbes kind of got an idea about it, but she was moved aside, and Shona Robinson, not a clue. And so she signed up to an even worse version of that fiscal framework. Now, what this means is we can't do things like, we have to maintain the existing PFIs we've got to keep them. This neoliberalism's coming in with the free ports, etc. Now, the reason is because there is no one in power in the cabinet that actually understands any of this. So they are completely at the mercy of the civil service. The civil service is perfectly happy with the neoliberalism, and the civil service are somewhat at the mercy of the lobby groups, Charlotte Street partners, etc. So the people in cabinet don't have a clue. The civil service don't care about Scotland because it's the UK civil service, and the neoliberals and the business people are just rubbing their hands and ready to asset strip this country. And that is what's happening now. That's happening now. And it's going to tie us in, Because once these companies are in the free ports and they've signed the free ports agreements, that's like the PFI again. So we don't have time. We have to get out of this union in 2026. We have to. So now everybody must think of how to do that, because we cannot rely on the politicians and we cannot rely on our leaders. No one's coming to save us. We are going to have to save ourselves, and we need to be independent as soon as we can.
Here. Were you surprised, Lloyd, that we're in another recession? Oh, that's an awkward. I think I'll start charging £1.50 inflation.
I'm not in the least surprised that we're back into recession, because we're effectively being run by the casino players from the City of London. Rishi Sunak is one of them. Shaps is one of them. You know, everybody, you go right through the cabinet. Their money comes from buying and selling money. They don't make anything except money from money. You know, this is exactly what that famous Palestinian went into the temple and cast out, namely the money changers. And we're being run by the money changers, and they will make mistakes, as they do. But it's the nature of Britain. If we have a recession, it always means the same thing. The poor get poorer and the rich get richer. And the rich get richer because they don't pay tax in this country. They ship it out to the British Virgin Islands, or to the Maldives, or to the Isle of Man, or to the Channel Islands, or all the other various places on the merry-go-round that Phil has outlined on many occasions before. We need to waken up to this. These people are not our betters. They are not your betters. They prove on a day and daily basis that they are definitely not your betters. They are inhuman in their approach. They lack any form of empathy for anyone who is not in their club or their class. And recession, as I said, recession makes money for the rich. It suits the rich to have recessions. It's a simple, straightforward fact. It will happen again and again and again until we do what Denise just said, which is make our country free in 2026, if not before, by collapsing Holyrood. But that would take imagination. That would take imagination and smarts. And to some degree, those who should be making or having that imagination and applying those ideas actually come from exactly the same class, but 2 rungs down the ladder from those that are currently making the decisions in number 10 and 11 Downing Street. And I mean by that, both the leader of the Scottish Labour Party, who is a public schoolboy, and the leader of the Scottish National Party, who is a public schoolboy. These people have had cushioned cotton wool lives. It's easy for them to say that they understand poverty. They do not. And their actions prove on a day and daily basis that they do not. So recession, succession, recession.
Yeah, it comes as no surprise either. We just seem to stumble from one financial crisis to another. And as Lloyd and Denise have pointed out, it is always those who can least defend themselves against these recessions that take the hit.
This is about a lack of political will to address the ills of the country. It's about a lack of ability, a lack of vision, a lack of imagination on the part of the SNP who were elected to attain independence. It's about people feeling powerless because they get the shit kicked out of them all too regularly. It's about, during the COVID pandemic, suddenly we were able to cure the homeless problem. And yet here we are a couple of years later, Alex Salmond is visiting a homeless shelter in Glasgow, and we've got several cities in Scotland declaring homeless emergencies. And I've got clients on my books who are in prison being sued for rent arrears, who are going to have their tenancies taken off them when they're due to be released from prison a couple of weeks later. There is no joined up thinking because there is a lack of a social conscience in Scotland at the moment. If there were a social conscience in Scotland, Denise and I would not have had to attend that protest in Edinburgh today in respect of keeping males out of female jails. We wouldn't have a homeless problem. We wouldn't have social work issues. We wouldn't be debating drugs deaths and alcohol deaths and suicide deaths in the numbers that we are. We are governed at the moment by fools who are either ignorant of the consequences of their inaction, or they just don't understand and don't care what it is that they are doing to the people of this country day in and day out. Scotland is a wealthy country. We know this. That is why Westminster wants to hold on to us. If we were a basket case, we would have been binned long ago. We are being bled dry from our oil to our gas to our wind to our wave power, our whisky, our tourist industry, our forestry, our seas, our fisheries. You name it. Scotland is one of the wealthiest countries on the planet in theory, but we're being bled dry by Westminster and by those Scots who are enabling this to happen. And every death from hypothermia, every death from addiction, every death from depression is something that should haunt those who were elected to take Scotland out of a state of dependence to becoming independent. And the quicker the people of Scotland realise that and have the confidence, the courage and the optimism to take the solution into their own hands, the better a place Scotland will become.
You're absolutely right, Eva. As always. Phil, we're running out of time, but it's one of the biggest arguments of the unionists about, oh, you can't afford to survive it. Yeah, you'll be skint. We've been skint all my life. As I say, I'm in my 7th decade, and it's one recession after another recession after a devaluation, back to Harold Wilson, the pound in your pocket, everything. It's unending. Britain is a failed experiment. The United Kingdom is done.
Yes, and remember that those who say it's a recession, therefore you will have to go without, they will not be going without.
Oh.
What does the headline mean? Well, a recession is officially defined as 2 straight quarters of economic decline. The problem is that figures are manipulated. For example, the governments here where I'm currently in the US are anticipated to reduce interest rates because this is an election year. And they will be seen to be doing something good for the people. And that's exactly how GERS works. That's how the City of London operates. That's how fiscal and monetary policy operates. They feed the lobbyists we were mentioned ahead and the powers that really pull the strings, and the people usually end up paying for it. And the Associated Press was on this and did quite a good story on it. And it's all about forecast figures and not actually hitting your target figures, and that's what they're talking about. It makes this a recession. But in reality, since COVID, we've been in pretty poor shape, and the numbers have been manipulated to try and show that we're recovering and doing better. But Britain is in decline, like it or lump it. And you mentioned something you mentioned in your question, Roddy, reminded me of the UK is an experiment that's failed. There was a brilliant article, I can't remember the guy's name, and it was he analysed the 100 years between the partition of Ireland, because if you want to see how this experiment failed between Britain and a country right beside us, the people in Ireland are very, very similar to the people in Britain. Very similar. Northern Ireland, Southern Ireland, very, very similar. And the 100 years between the partition of Ireland and a few years ago in 21, the centenary of that event, and the analysis of the economic prospects and profitability of both. And I think it was 3rd of May 21, ERA was roughly half as prosperous as the north of Ireland. Its industry approximately comprised of Guinness and a biscuit factory, right? With many folk being employed in agriculture. And the north was British. The south became independent and bolstered by Britain, funded by Britain, and the prosperity that was the north, because remember, these were the richest counties. That's why Britain put the plantation there. Contrast that with today, or 21. ERA is approximately twice as wealthy as the north, and that was a British system put in place by Britain, supported by Britain, run the British way. And you look at the North stopped being prosperous after the Second World War. It stopped washing its own face roughly after World War II. So Northern Ireland has been a financial burden to the UK and has been since World War II. Contrast that again to Scotland. which is the cash cow that keeps giving, which is why they don't really give a shit about Northern Ireland, quite happy to ditch it, but they would rather hang on to Scotland because we continue to make money. That analysis needs to be looked into in greater detail. We need to shout this from the rooftops, and we need to understand that this is a game we're losing. And the powers that be never lose in recession. It's where you make the most money. Nobody's got cash. Prices drop. People go bankrupt. Companies go bankrupt. And you step in with your cash. You pick stuff up for a song, and off you go in the merry-go-round again to make yet another billion or trillion. So no, don't be conned by this. We really need, it comes back again full circle on that merry-go-round. We need to get out and start looking after our own affairs and make Scotland a better place for all.
Here. And I know we've got quite a lot of unionists to watch. Some of them sit in when it goes live on Sunday and they make snidey little comments. But ask yourself this, boys, all you unionists that are watching, if we're such a financial basket case, why do you think that the Westminster lot hang on so tightly, be Labour or Tory? They don't want to let Scotland go. If we were a financial basket case, they would throw us out the door. Now, we've come to the end, but there's one more thing I want to give gentlemen and ladies. Our ex-colleague who used to be on here, Auri Vaughan, used to say, we need to get angry, the people are too apathetic. It's true. Now, with what's going on in the Red Sea with the Houthis, has created a great problem, which is there's now a tea shortage apparently in the UK. Could this be the final straw to get the people out their armchairs, away from their tellies, Lloyd, and rioting in the streets? Tea bags are short in supply. Could that be the final straw? Or maybe the mute button.
It'll have to be tea and biscuits, or if the Houthis start killing puppies, then the folk of Britain will get up off their arses and get excited about it. Nah, on a more kind of serious note, what the Houthis have done is an example to the world. They've effectively created themselves as a peacekeeping force by using weapons, but not killing people. It's quite extraordinary considering what they've been through in the past, well, since Britain invaded them back in the late 1800s. What can get the British off their backsides and away from the telly, the coupon, the bouquets and the boozer? I don't know. Maybe we should ask Tiny Roland, because he was the one who first used that phrase.
I mean, the people of England suffer as well, and we concern ourselves with Scotland. They're absolutely right. Let them sort themselves out. But could tea be the final straw? Or the lack of tea?
I have very bad memories of Liz Truss before she became the Prime Minister making that terrible speech about pork markets. And she also spoke about exporting Yorkshire tea and jam and muffins. So I think that there are horrible political implications when you start talking about tea. It just beggars belief that that's what's getting them excited now, when there are so many horrible things happening in the world that they seem to be either divided or actually pretty silent about.
As you're our guest, Denise, our mysterious guest for the day, we'll leave the last word with you. Does the shortage of tea bags get you angry enough to go on the street and burn a few tyres like the French?
Well, on the Houthis, though, they aren't a very nice regime. I mean, they have hung homosexuals. So they're not a nice people, and they're not people we should put as heroes, just to say that. But on tea, I believe we don't need this tea, because I think there's Turkish tea. And a programme that is being promoted actively at the moment. So I would advise people, Turkish tea at your tea time.
Oh dear, now you're in trouble. On that note, we shall end this episode, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I've enjoyed sitting here with my friends chewing the fat.
Hey, what about the Boston Tea Party? Come on, that's what it's all about. That's it all kicked off. I'm sitting in America here going, I know exactly what I'm going to power into this one, and you give me a big dissy, a big rubber ear.
Yeah, the Boston Tea Party kicked off the end of the old colonies. It might be the thing. It might be the thing. The lack of Tetley tea bags is what brought down the union. Okay, I'm back on Wednesday, folks. Now, a bit of a surprise here on Wednesday. I'm not going to But we're shouting on here every week for unity of the politicians. Well, it's time for unity of the grassroots. And we're going to do our bit here on Prism to show you how you get unity among the grassroots, because the grassroots need to get together to get moving. As my guests here have told you, we need out the union, and we need out at the latest by 2026. And I'm going to tell you and show and share with you how we do it. And until then, you and yours take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.